Hello and welcome to another episode of How to Be a Great GM. In this episode, we're looking at how to make your villains, and I'm talking your true villains, just that much better. Now, 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 or 50 or 100, I'm exaggerating, of you guys wrote in on those wonderful comments that you send in, Optimus Convoy, Without Nameify, and Egotistic Lily, just to name but a few, wrote in and said, how do we make our villains just that more villainous? And that is what we're going to be talking about in this video, is how do you push your villains to the next level? And it's fairly simple if you remember the golden rule. And the golden rule is the villain wants something badly and is having difficulty getting it. And the reason why he's having difficulty getting it is those ever-present PCs who just keep foiling his plans. Now, the first thing that one needs to look at when you're designing your villain is to work out whether he is a henchman, a villain, or a nemesis. And ultimately, we want our villains to be the nemesis of the show. We want the villain to be this ultimate evil that seems almost impossible to defeat. So how do we set up a nemesis? Well, setting up a villain and setting up a henchman is fairly easy. They are the, I'm here for an episode or for several sessions, and then they get defeated by the PCs. Because here's something important to remember. Your PCs must at some point defeat the henchmen and the villains to get a sense of accomplishment. The nemesis can remain behind for your campaign. They can be there for your year-long game, your 2-year-long game, your 3-year-long game, however it happens to be. The villain and the henchman get replaced and defeated by the heroes over time. They're your recyclable villains, if you like. However, the rules for Nemesis apply to villain and to henchman, but on a smaller and shorter term scale. So how do we create a Nemesis? Well, there's 3 ways that you, as the GM, can use your Nemesis in your game. And the first one is a pretty blunt use. That is the Mastermind. This is the villain who comes together with all of the little plots, and he sends out his villains and his henchmen, and they go off and do their bidding, his bidding. And they do a bank robbery, or they steal the king's scepter, or they steal a starship, or whatever the case might be. And our player characters will discover the link to the henchman. They will eventually face the henchman. The henchman will reveal the link to the villain. The villain may not be encountered in that particular session, but maybe 3 or 4 sessions later, once the PCs have worked out how to catch him or where to catch him, they'll capture the villain. When they capture the villain, that is when they now will learn about the Mastermind. This is the character who's been orchestrating everything in the shadows. And if you look at somebody like, say, Professor Moriarty from Sherlock Holmes, that is a mastermind. They're not a very subtle long-term villain. They're there, we learn about them, and then our players are simply trying to get to the mastermind. They have to go through villains and henchmen in order to get there, and however many villains and henchmen is entirely up to you as to how long you want it to take for your players to eventually get to facing the mastermind. The mastermind is the basic blunt force trauma nemesis. They're the ones that are there. Ultron, for example, is another example of a mastermind. He orchestrates a few little things, and then suddenly we learn of his presence. The next type of villain that you can have is the never-present villain. Now, the never-present villain is the villain who you never actually hear about, and your players might actually never encounter the never-present villain. They might hear rumors of this strange organization, but they will never actually encounter the main nemesis in the form of the never-present. So if you look at Hydra, for example, Hydra has villains that represent powers throughout the stories, but the actual entity of Hydra is the ultimate nemesis. It can almost never be defeated because, well, it's just never actually there. It's represented by villains and henchmen. Of course, maybe there is some superpower right in the background that's doing something, but we don't know about it, and quite frankly, it's not really important. What is important, though, is that the never-present villain, the never-present nemesis, is a force that just keeps things moving. Finally, and this is the one that I really want to focus on in today's video, is the player villain. Now, this is the one that most of you have been asking about, and this is the villain that is, in my opinion, the one that is the most entertaining to play. Because this is the villain who infiltrates themselves into the players' characters and works with them and tries to help them, and then eventually turns around and stabs them in the back. Or if you're a truly great GM, stabs them in the face and walks away, to create this ultimate nemesis. And if you watch most feature films and things, there is this ultimate nemesis that is always there, that they just can't get to because of all of the villains and the henchmen in the way. But the real betrayal is when the nemesis is working with the players' characters, because then it feels a lot more visceral. The players themselves will actually feel as if they have been betrayed, which will make them really engage with the story. So how do we make this player villain, or this long-term NPC villain? There are a few things that I've looked at. One of them is how do we get them to become part of the players group to begin with? Players are naturally suspicious. So if you have this shady character suddenly arrive and say, "Good evening, I wish for to help you. I am purely an innocent bystander with fangs," they're not going to go, "Oh, sure, buddy, come and help us." They're going to put a stake through his heart. You need to work out a cunning way of getting your villain in with them. And here's a few little thoughts that I had on the matter. The first is the villain can start off as the victim. Remember, the villain's plan is a long-term plan. They want to achieve something. And usually that's power, or they want to unlock the secrets of the universe, or just take over the universe. You know, simple things. But how are they going to do that? Their first step might be to remove anyone who could be a potential threat, which of course is your players' characters. How do we remove a potential threat? Well, first we have to understand if they are a threat. Once we've determined if they are or they aren't, we need to try and convince them to join our side, because that will make life a lot easier. And if they refuse to join our side, and invariably they will, we then need to figure out a very cunning way of eradicating them. Now, the Mastermind type of nemesis will simply send villains and goons after the players as much as they can in an attempt to destroy them right from the get-go. The never-present villain doesn't really care about the players because he doesn't see them as being anything of value. It is only the truly insidious villain who realizes that he needs to understand them first. So, if he sets up a heist in which he is one of the victims and the characters actually save him from the bad guys, well, then the players are a little disarmed. They don't necessarily see him as the bad guy. If you're a truly cunning GM, you might put in one or two inconsistencies in his story, very, very subtle, of course, that only the smartest of players will go, "Hang on, but you said that you were standing over there when the blast went off, but you weren't." Play it cool, play it subtle. This is a long-term game. The longer you play out the villain being part of the hero's group, the more the betrayal will hurt and feel like a truly evil villainous act. He could play the victim, so the heroes actually rescue him. He could hire the heroes to go and defeat some force of evil. He's got another little villain that's trying to suck up to him, and he says, "Right, you go and orchestrate a bank heist. Here's the plans. Here you're going to use these weapons. You're going to go and do this, that, and the next thing." And then he immediately turns around and hires the players' characters and says, "I have learned that there may be a bank heist. I'm trying to erase crime from the city. Would you help me?" And the players show up, and of course there's a bank heist, and the villain makes sure that he gets caught and prosecuted duly. Of course, the mastermind, the nemesis, will make sure that the players don't manage to get too much information out of the henchmen that have been involved in the heist, because he doesn't want to get linked to it in any shape or form. So he could be their sponsor. He could be the damsel in distress. So he's not the victim of a terrible crime. He is literally somebody who needs to be helped and protected from the forces of evil. It's very easy to make sure that even the most bungling of players will keep your villain protected if the villain is the one who's orchestrating the attacks against him. "Oh, I need to be protected for 24 hours because there's a secret organization that's hunting me. Send a quick text message to the secret organization as to location, etc., etc., etc." Again, if you can drop in little subtle inconsistencies here and there where the players might pick up on it, but maybe they're just suspicious, then it makes you seem a better GM in the long term. And then finally, the villain could be an actual villain, but he's offering to help the players as a kind of repentance. I have been committing these evil crimes, but I have now turned my mind to the forces of good, and so I will help you overcome it. There is a wonderful TV series of which the name has come back to me. It's called White Collar, which is a wonderful story where you have an evil character, effectively a thief, who turns coat to try and help solve crimes. And of course, what happens halfway through is that he has been implicated in a crime, and because of his criminal background, everyone suspects him. So he then gets to prove himself again and again and again as to being loyal, until eventually there's a whole nother twist to it. So if he can be the prisoner offering help, then the players who are naturally skeptical of his offering anyway have to turn around and say, well, we know he's evil, but he's offering to help. And if he consistently helps for several missions, time and time again, that suspicion will eventually start to ebb and disappear, and that allows you to then set on to step 2. So you've now got your Nemesis involved with the players, and they're quite happy to have him there, at least temporarily. Now you take it to step 2. The Nemesis must now work with the players, and they can do that by performing 4 functions. Remember, we spoke about what NPCs do. They're a guide or an advisor, or they're simply there to drive the story forward. Well, your Nemesis can take on 4 roles, and he can switch between them as your campaign extends. The first 2 roles would be he's either a guide or he's an advisor. If he's a guide, then that means that he is perhaps giving them vital information. Oh, if you want to infiltrate the Mastermind's lair on the secret island in Antarctica, this is your best approach. Alternatively, if he's an advisor, he could simply be giving them background information, which may or may not be useful. And remember, he's going to use the players' characters to pick off his enemies, because a villain without his own enemies already has won. So you need to have enemies who will try and seed fears and doubts into the players' minds that perhaps the Nemesis that's working with them isn't as good as he appears to be. Of course, this just gives him more opportunity to get the PCs to go off and get rid of his enemies. So he will either guide them or advise them successfully. Another way to do it is he can be their sponsor, in which case the players come back and they're all despondent because their magic armor has been destroyed by the rust monster, and miraculously the villain simply says, oh, well, I have the staff of ultimate destruction, or I have this, or I have that. He's never going to give them a weapon or a piece of equipment that will ultimately be able to be used against him. He's not an idiot. But he will give them stuff that is nice and shiny and will distract the players from any kind of evil doings that are going on in the background. Nothing makes players more loyal than giving them stuff or cash. Never be afraid to give them money, because the alternative role that the Nemesis can play is that of the idiot spender. The players accumulate some kind of wealth, they come back, and the Nemesis, who's been trying to help them, has spent $10,000 bribing some foreign power to give him a little bit of information which the PCs already know. So he can help deplete their resources, but if he's doing it with the best of intentions, well, then he's just a bumbling fool. And who's going to think that a bumbling fool is the mastermind Nemesis? Now, a classic example of that is if you watch the film The Usual Suspects. Very interesting film where the bumbling idiot, spoiler alert, is the actual Nemesis. So get the Nemesis to work with the characters, and the more he can help them, the more they will start to trust him. Then, when the characters start to get suspicious because of the little inconsistencies that you've been dropping around, the villain, the Nemesis, will simply get himself injured in the presence of the players. He has to go out with them into the field for whatever reason, or perhaps he runs away from their secret lair and they think he's turned on them, only to discover that he's actually gone out on a mission to try and prove himself worthy of being in their great presence. Never be afraid to throw out flattery at players' characters, because the players will pick up on it and they'll love it. So use the tools that you have at your disposal to make the players think that the villain is working for them. If he's off on a mission trying to prove himself because gosh dang it, you guys work so hard and I just stay back in the secret lair, I'm going out to prove that I should be part of you guys too, but now I'm in trouble, come and save me please. Well, that's just another disarming technique to get the players to start to like this character. So don't be afraid to send him out to go and try and do his own missions, to stuff it up and then to need them to come and save him. Alternatively, have him join them for a mission. No, I'm not letting you go on your own. This evil villain, which I've secretly contacted and made sure everything is already planned for this next mission, this evil villain must be stopped and I'm coming with you, so that I can get shot by the henchmen that I've paid to shoot me in exactly the right place at exactly the right time, which is when all of you are looking at me, protecting me from the evil henchmen that I've already paid. Did you follow that? I hope you did, because otherwise you're not going to make a good Nemesis. The Nemesis needs to set up situations where he himself can take a bullet or a phaser blast or a magic spear or a lightning bolt or a fireball or whatever system you're using. He needs to be able to be seen by the player's characters as taking one for the team, because then he starts to become part of the team. Once he's become part of the team, and this is now a step that is entirely up to you, and it is a subject that we will talk about at a later stage, is the love interest. If the villain can start to form a romantic bond with one of the characters, what a pleasure. Let him do that. Create a fake backstory for him, one of tragedy where he was the misunderstood youth and he had to fight on the streets to save his poor mother and she got killed by the gang lord and that's how he got involved in it and now he's repentant, if that's the angle that he's gone with. Or his misspent youth where he saw people being violated all the time, so he's dedicated his life to trying to save people from that exact situation. Whatever the case might be, let your imagination run wild, create these amazing backstories, and take the people out on a date. Have these romantic moments, but of course you are the ultimate nemesis. So whilst on that romantic date, have a bunch of thugs come along and try and beat the crap out of the nemesis and his date. Of course, the nemesis leaps to her or his salvation, has the shit beaten out of them, and they're left in the alleyway. It just helps reinforce that nemesis as being part of the team. Once you've got it to the point that the player's characters are turning to that nemesis as a stable point, before they go on a mission, they ask the nemesis, what would you do? How would you do it? What are you thinking? Halfway through the mission, they contact him or he contacts them and they start to rely on all of that. That is when you set them up for the ultimate disaster. That is when the nemesis says, right, I've got information that this cruise liner is the absolute base of this fake evil creature or whatever the case might be. You need to get on it. They will jump onto that ship in a heartbeat, and that's when the villain presses the button and blows the whole ship sky high, leaving your players to float around in the ocean and maybe survive, maybe not survive. Of course, it's better if they survive, because then they have to get revenge on this ultimate betrayal. And you better prepare your nemesis monologue, because, well, ultimately that's what all evil superpowers have to do. They have to have that speech of, for years I have groomed you and now you have removed all of my enemies and now I can take over the world because you are all going to die. Thank you so much. Beep. Blurb ship, blurb spaceship, blurb space station, insert Cthulhu monster, whatever you like. The betrayal can only come once the players are reliant on that NPC, reliant on that nemesis to help them. Once that's happened, you can then turn the tables and have the nemesis now reveal his true nature. And of course, if there was a love interest, he can say, well, thanks for the entertainment, it was amusing, but I'm still going to kill you. So it really then allows you to play the typical movie James Bond villain, and you can go mad with that. And of course, then the second half of the campaign is where the players are now trying to catch up with the nemesis, who knows exactly how they operate, who knows exactly where their bases of operation are, who have siphoned out all of their bank accounts and has handed them over to the local authorities, because that's what villains do. So I hope this has given you some insight into how to create a diabolical nemesis who is a long-term nemesis, and that gives you a sense of how long it should take you to bring out the true nemesis in your game, and how to use villains here and there to create a greater sense of evil. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and until next time, happy gaming.